The moon hung pale and foreboding in the overcast sky, casting ghostly shadows across the abandoned cemetery path. Occasional owl hoots pierced the heavy silence, heightening the sense of dread. "George! Wait for me! This place gives me the creeps," called out John, a rugged-looking middle-aged man struggling up a steep, grave-lined hill. Ahead of him, the figure moving with unsettling agility had an air of distinction marked by a streak of white hair glowing eerily in the moonlight. Despite his striking features, an aura of darkness clung to him. "Hurry, John! After midnight, the infant spirit's power will diminish," the man said, his voice echoing like a chilling wind through dead leaves. John quickened his pace, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and urgency. "Right, George," he gasped upon reaching the crest. "Clear the grass from this grave," George commanded, setting up his array of occult tools with a sinister precision. John rolled up his sleeves and began uprooting the overgrown weeds around an old grave marker. Meanwhile, George meticulously arranged the tools of his dark craft, his movements deliberate and calm. When everything was in place, he turned his gaze toward the moon. "Now dig," George ordered. With trembling hands, John grabbed a shovel. His strokes hurried and uneven. Soon, he uncovered a small, decaying coffin. He took a crowbar, inserted it into the cracked wood, and with a disturbingly loud snap, pried it open. Inside was the corpse of an infant, its skin pallid and shriveled, a stark contrast to the innocence of sleep. John froze, the crowbar slipping from his fingers. "Move! Remove the body!" snapped George, breaking John's paralysis. Suppressing his horror, John lifted the tiny corpse, placing it on a yellow cloth as instructed. George swiftly wrapped it, drawing occult symbols in blood-red cinnabar, securing the bundle with crimson twine. His actions were eerily methodical, as if he had done this countless times. "When you return home, bow 3 times and now down 9, and never look back until you've placed it on the altar," George directed in a tone that brooked no argument. With the wrapped infant in arms, John painfully obeyed, his knees bleeding from the sharp stones. At home, he completed the ritual and collapsed, the bundle beside him. "Kneel," commanded George, returning with a dagger etched with nightmarish symbols. He plunged it into the corpse, black viscous fluid pooling beneath. Mixing it with cinnabar and burning a talisman over it, he created a foul concoction. "Drink," he ordered. John hesitated only a moment before the desperation for power overcame his disgust. He drank, gagging on the bitter taste. George then slashed John's wrist, mixing his blood with more cinnabar and a talisman. He poured this mixture over the infant's wound, which soaked it up greedily. The child's eyes snapped open, glowing unnaturally. As George chanted in an ancient tongue, the wind howled, extinguishing the candles. The infant began to thrash violently, issuing a piercing cry. "He is yours now. He will bring you fortune at a price. His name is Liam. Remember, he demands loyalty and sacrifice." George's voice was like a death knell. "Yes, Daddy," came a chilling whisper as John held the bundle, a twisted affection in his eyes. After the sacrifice, the baby's coffin was placed in a separate, highly secluded location known only to John. This place was a dark, hidden chamber filled with various offerings arranged meticulously around the coffin. Despite the darkness of his actions, John's life transformed drastically. His rise to vice president of his company was meteoric, driven by dark forces, and started his own company. But he still has a strong competitor, Mike. Mike's demise was orchestrated by the same evil spirit propelling John's success. He was plagued by relentless nightmares, leaving him sleep-deprived and paranoid. Shadows seemed to follow him, whispering threats that only he could hear. His health deteriorated rapidly. He developed strange, inexplicable ailments that no doctor could diagnose. In his final days, Mike was a shell of his former self, haunted by unseen terrors until he succumbed to a sudden, fatal heart attack. This tragic end, shrouded in mystery and fear, conveniently removed the last obstacle in John's ascent to power. Because of Mike's death, clearing John's path, created his own empire. One evening, attempting to appease the restless spirit, John presented toys and treats. But obviously these things were not enough. But John had no idea what these evil spirits needed. Inside the coffin, the malevolent spirit murmured and holed, its cries echoing ominously through the dark room. George only instructed John to regularly offer toys and sacrifices, but no one truly knew what the infant spirit desired. Despite John's meticulous adherence to these rituals, the real longing of the malevolent infant remained a mystery, eluding even the most careful observance of the prescribed offerings. Yes, his lover, Sarah, unsuspectingly announced her pregnancy. Panicked, John plotted to send her abroad post-birth to protect her from the spirit's wrath. The months passed with deceptive calm until the night Sarah went into labor. As Sarah strained in the delivery room, John paced outside, haunted by the wails of pain and the storm's cacophony. Each flash of lightning seemed to illuminate his darkest fears. When the nurse finally emerged, her smile was bright, but it sent a chill down John's spine.
Congratulations. It's a boy. He's already smiling, just like he knows you.
She chirped.
John's steps faltered as he approached the nursery window. There, among the rows of swaddled newborns, his son's eyes found an impossible, unsettling stare that bored deep into his guilt. The baby's innocent features shockingly mirrored Mike's, the kind-hearted rival whose mysterious death had catapulted John to the president. Even the birthmark under the baby's left eye was a grotesque replica of Mike's. The hospital lights flickered, casting ghostly shadows as John's mind raced with horrific possibilities. Was this his sin reincarnated? Had Mike's soul returned to exact vengeance through this newborn vessel? The thought clawed at him, a terror that no amount of rational thought could dispel. John's joy at becoming a father was corrupted by a suffocating dread. He knew the spirit he had bound to his service would not take kindly to this new heir, a living reminder of his vile deeds. In a desperate attempt to protect Sarah and the baby, John concocted a plan to send them abroad. Each passing day was a tightening noose, the domestic bliss, a macabre facade. John's nights were sleepless, haunted by the infant's knowing gaze and the lurking presence of the vengeful spirit, always watching, always waiting. The day of their departure was fraught with tension. John packed their bags with trembling hands, his every move shadowed by the palpable wrath of the unseen. The air in the house was thick, charged with a sinister energy that seemed to whisper dark omens. As Sarah cradled their son, oblivious to the looming danger, John's heart broke under the weight of his dreadful sentence. He knew the reckoning was near, and the storm outside was only a prelude to the tempest about to engulf their lives. The time to flee abroad dawned. John intended to pave the way for their safety first, by traveling alone to set everything up for his wife and child in the foreign country. Anxiety clawed at John's mind. He had meticulously planned every detail, from false identities to safe houses, yet an ominous sense of doom gnawed at him. The small duffel bag at his feet contained everything he thought he'd need for his new life. Cash, passports, and a few precious keepsakes. He glanced at his watch constantly, every tick amplifying his nervous energy. John stepped into his car, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. The route to the airport was well memorized, but his mind wandered, replaying every critical moment of the past few months. He drove through the city's bustling streets, feeling like a ghost among the living, unnoticed and forgotten. He tried to focus on the road, but his mind kept drifting back to Sarah and their newborn son. Would they ever forgive him for what he had done? Would he ever forgive himself? As the cityscape gave way to the quieter suburbs, a dense fog began to roll in, shrouding the streets in a ghostly veil. John switched on his headlights, the beams piercing the mist but doing little to ease his growing unease. It was then that his phone buzzed on the passenger seat, an urgent message from an unknown number. He hesitated, knowing he shouldn't stop, but the compulsion to look was too strong. He pulled over to the side of the road and read the text. "Come home." Urgent. Panic surged through him. Was it a trap? Had someone discovered his plans? He debated ignoring it, but something deeper, a gnawing guilt, a sense of responsibility, compelled him to turn the car around. The fog seemed to thicken as he drove back, the familiar streets now appearing foreign and menacing. As he neared his home, he saw the flashing red and blue lights cutting through the evening fog. His heart pounded, a drumbeat of dread. The police cars parked haphazardly outside his house were a grim beacon, drawing him into a nightmare he could never have imagined. John parked a distance away, his legs feeling like lead as he forced himself to walk towards the house. He ducked under the police tape, his breath shallow and quick. The front door was ajar, the warm light spilling out onto the cold, wet ground. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The sight that met him was beyond comprehension. Sarah lay lifeless, her body a tableau of unspeakable violence, her blood painting the once warm living room an icy shade of horror. The coppery scent of blood filled the air, mixing with the familiar smells of home, creating a sickeningly surreal atmosphere. Nearby, incongruously untouched by the carnage, sat his newborn son. His tiny hands were stained crimson, yet his expression was eerily calm, almost serene. The juxtaposition of his innocent face against the grisly scene around him was a grotesque mockery of normalcy. John's heart pounded in his chest as he took in the scene, each detail more horrifying than the last. A sinister giggle echoed from the shadows, too knowing, too mature to belong to an infant. He stumbled toward the basement, the source of the chilling sound, his every step heavy with dread. The basement door creaked open to reveal a macabre scene. The infant spirit and his son, surrounded by shadows, playing amidst the chaos as if it were mere backdrop to their dark games. The air thickened as the baby turned to John, speaking with a voice that bore the timbre of his dead rival, Mike. "That woman, I disposed of her." The child's voice was cold, vengeful. "You unleashed me. Now behold my return. Your deeds wrought me, and now I come for you." Frozen with terror, John backed away, but the child advanced, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent joy. "Daddy, it's playtime," he said, his voice a twisted echo of innocence lost. The room seemed to close in, shadows dancing like specters at the edge of John's vision. Before John could react, the infant's mouth widened impossibly, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The last thing John saw was his son, a monster born of his own sins, lunging forward. The sharp pain at his neck was swift, the life draining from him as his vision blurred, sinking into darkness. His final thought was a gruesome acknowledgement of his fate, entwined forever with the cursed spirit he had summoned. His legacy sealed in a legacy of blood and vengeance.